Okay, this is perfect. We can roll with this. Nobody touch anything. We're going to get started. Hands off the keyboard. Welcome everybody to the Decentralization Privacy Security panel. I'm Tor. We're going to go one by one with some very quick introductions. So I am the founder of Secret Foundation. We support Secret Network, which is the first blockchain with privacy-preserving smart contracts on mainnet. We care a lot about privacy. It's what I talk obsessively about. I host a podcast about it. I appear on podcasts about it. Today, we're going to talk about not our approach to privacy, but everybody's approach to privacy and security in this space, why it's such a tricky issue to solve the relationship between privacy and transparency. It's very complex. It's kind of two sides of the same coin. I'm very interested to see what all of our panelists think about that topic and others. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Dean, then Alex, then Bruce for intros.
So hello, thank you for having me here. I'm Dean Tribble. I'm CEO of Agoric. One of the original investor in Agoric was Zcash, or Electric Coin Company, because we've been thinking about smart contracts for, well, I worked on the first production smart contract back in 1989. Our chief scientist, Mark Miller, wrote the Agoric Open Systems papers, which were the first big articulation of software agents creating and participating in markets. And the zero knowledge stuff has been, you know, and as early cypherpunks, we saw the zero knowledge stuff in its infancy and have touched on and worked on various projects of that flavor for a long time. But much of this was around bringing smart contract technology to large scale applications like, you know, pre-blockchain eBays and Venmos and PayPals and things like that, and driving the idea of systems that enable cooperation forward, which to our mind, a lot of the value of the world of smart contracts is enabling more cooperation between more people by enabling, you know, enabling you to cooperate with people that you don't have to trust as much. And, you know, the more cooperation there is, the easier cooperation is, the more cooperative a world we'll have, and we like that better. But privacy is crucial to both interpersonal stuff and to business work. Just to be able to operate as a human, we ought to expect and ought to get privacy for much of our cooperative interactions. And so that's, you know, so we don't currently have zero knowledge magic into the public chain that we'll be deploying next year, but we have very easy ability to spin off side chains that work in a nice uniform asynchronous fabric with the rest of our smart contract environment. And then eventually I want to be able to leverage all of the innovation that happens across the rest of this ecosystem in terms of, you know, roll-ups and zero knowledge off-chain things or zero knowledge on-chain things. So we're really looking forward to getting to the point to absorb that, but completely committed to how important that is for the future of blockchain.
Awesome.
Thank you, Dean. Yes, my name is Alex Gluchowski. I'm from Meta Labs, the co-founder and CEO of Meta Labs, and we're building ZK Sync, a ZK rollup to scale Ethereum with preservation of all the properties that make Ethereum valuable, with full trustlessness and high scalability. And the ZK rollup obviously has zero knowledge proofs at its core, and it's a big part of our vision to enable privacy. Although we're not doing privacy by default in this protocol, but we start with scalability, because what we think is to make things, to make privacy works, you have to make it very usable. So we have an example of PGP, which didn't really take off because it was so cumbersome. But then messenger apps appeared with end-to-end encryption, and they were easy to use and really cheap to use, like in terms of time and effort, and they actually took off. So we are focused on making privacy affordable. Bruce?
Cool. My name is Bruce Pond. I am the founder of Ocean Protocol, or one of them, and we're all about data sharing for AI, unlocking data to give people kind of more power and control over their data. And the main challenge that we're trying to solve is two-sided. Number one is give people kind of comfort and privacy when they share. And the second thing is putting a price on data that wasn't possible before. So we just released our Ocean Market, and we've been quite busy managing that for the last few weeks.
Outstanding. Yeah, thank you guys for the introductions. Clearly everybody here has a deep passion for providing, like, if not privacy as like the main products, privacy enabled products that then enable user adoption of these things. So we'll talk a little bit about usability. We'll talk a little bit about adoption that's enabled by privacy. Where I want to start, though, is a question around what is the relationship between decentralization and privacy. So something that I've brought up on my own podcast is, decentralization seems to be good in a lot of ways, like in terms of empowering end users, the next iteration of the internet, so on and so forth. But because blockchains by design are bad at privacy, good at correctness, and bad at protecting data, for example, they do seem to be at odds with each other. So my initial question is pretty high level, but is our current path of enabling decentralization, of scaling Web3, are we heading towards privacy preservation and protecting data for users, or are we heading more towards the opposite, denying the value of privacy, going towards a public by default model? And I guess what I'm really asking is, like, what's the current path we're on? Is it a good path? If it's not a good path, how could we begin to change it? And we'll start with Alex Brustein.
Sure. So in my opinion, these are orthogonal problems. They are independent, and blockchains enable this trustless cooperation Dean spoke about, so that people can cooperate without knowing each other personally, because there are some incentives and security mechanisms which enforce the rules which were put in place there. Privacy is something different, which is something you can put on top, or something you can use in entirely different contexts, like privacy of communication, privacy of my personal data, which I want to share with certain people and don't want to share with other people. So I think that we have these parallel tracks which are now converging, and we will have more applications on blockchains which support privacy. But the biggest problem there was that privacy, from the computational standpoint, is very expensive. So the privacy-preserving protocols have been known for decades now, but they never reached the point up till last year, or maybe this year, the point of maturity where they could actually be used for something practical beyond simple encryption. So something like multi-party computation, fully homomorphic encryption, zero-knowledge proofs. And on blockchains, things are even worse, because the computation, like you can perform trillions of operations on your computer, but on a blockchain, we're still optimizing bits and bytes to fit like structures in 32 or 256 bits and so on. So I think that both tracks are good, and they are converging, and we will see more private blockchain applications coming soon.
So I'm going to take a more retail perspective on this one. And blockchains aren't meant to solve privacy. I mean, yes, at a core level, they're pseudonymous based on addresses, but I think that in a future Web3 world where all applications are built on Web3 rails, you're still going to have the same situation as today, where for the hundreds of web services that you use, you're going to use a login ID, which you're going to duplicate, copy over, and some you're going to have different. And that type of distribution of different usernames, whether it's Bruce Pawn or B Pawn or what have you, that type of distribution or a numeric thing is still going to happen in the Web3 environment. It's just going to be ETH addresses. And so I think that privacy is definitely something, as Alex said, you can build on top of it, where you have things like where you can start mixing and matching ETH IDs. You can start spoofing your own ID. You can have different avatars to protect your privacy. But for the vast majority of people, privacy is not something that they are concerned about on a day-to-day basis. Surveillance, all that sort of stuff. And for most normal people, this is not a concern in their life. So I think privacy still in the Web3 environment will have the same type of attraction to people who are working in the security field, who are journalists, who are on the fringes of society and want to conceal parts of their identity just for their own safety or for whatever purpose, or political activists, these types of things. So I don't think privacy changes in a Web3 world in a sense, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, but the means of doing that may change underneath the hood.
So I'm processing that. That's really interesting. one of the things that I want to see, and I want the platforms to bring us and get to, is privacy is a default expectation. It's not something I should have to think about. Most of the people that don't think about privacy don't realize how bad it is that they've lost it, right? And the problem is you don't discover that until 8 years later, or whatever it is, where you're denied a job because they knew some point you did something crazy in your college years or whatever it is. And so it's one of those things where people kind of have these physical intuitions where they expect their interactions to be more private than they actually are, for the reasons that Bruce mentioned. I want the platforms to raise that expectation. Decentralization gives us permissionless access, ideally, and permissionless cooperation. I am thrilled that some elements of scaling that also may provide mechanisms to easily add privacy. But if we're going to get into mainstream use cases, if we're going to get into healthcare, if we're going to get into freight, let's talk simple freight. We did a large-scale security project at Sun Microsystems, which built big servers long ago that many of you don't remember, right? So many of the servers of the early internet came from Sun Microsystems. And people put data taps into the manufacturing systems so they could track deliveries of trucks delivering these servers, which they would physically then hijack with machine guns. Right? Did you want privacy with that? That's one of those things where that commercial activity desperately needed privacy, even though the coordination spanned countries of international coordination to package this up and get a delivery out finally. So there's one of these things where all of business and most of our personal life should have some expectation. And then I'm very curious on the data side. Clearly, there's value in data aggregation, and the interesting question is, how do we balance? The interesting challenge to me is, how do we make that? I don't want to say more controlled, but I would like the kind of assurance blockchain gives me on the execution of computation to provide me assurance of privacy of the patterns of data I'm sharing for data mining, so that, yes, I'm perfectly happy for you to do a better job of advertising to me the stuff that I would like, but I would like that to not turn into, you being able to drive my political point of view when I'm looking at a news application that has nothing to do with the advertisement, or these kinds of things where data used for one purpose gets repurposed for another. I don't want someone data mining my health information in order to change my insurance rates and that kind of thing. So some of this technology will help with that. Some of it will help with permissionlessly cooperating with people to be off the radar or off of particular data pool radars. And I think that we have to drive that so it's more in the infrastructure.
Thank you. I mean, those are all awesome perspectives. We're starting to talk a lot about this idea of privacy by default versus public by default. It does get very expensive once something is public by default to then introduce privacy. It does seem that once something is private by default, you can introduce publicity through viewing keys or other means, and it's a better structure. But then back to Bruce's point, do people value privacy enough in the first place to prioritize these systems being built from the ground up privacy first? I think we have an opportunity with Web3 to do so. Remains to be seen whether that's going to end up being the case, just because we have so many platforms emerging in this ecosystem that are not building privacy by default. Mm-hmm. But let's move towards something that actually Alex was touching on in his introduction. And to be mean, I'm going to make him go last, talking about the relationship between privacy and scalability. So how are projects working to prioritize privacy? Like, we're talking about it being extremely important. But how do you do it while also maintaining scalability of those same platforms? Maybe privacy is very good in narrow contexts or application-specific contexts. What do we do so that it is infusing every aspect of Web3? So similarly, we're going to go Bruce, then Dean, then Alex.
Thank you. So we're struggling with this right now. So we designed Ocean Market, we just released 3 weeks ago, privacy first. You have an Ethereum address, you have a data set, you can play already on the market. The reality is different. Anything with game theoretic aspects to it, where you don't have like an oracle with a trusted kind of data stream that's already been authenticated, all that sort of stuff. So if you're dealing with a machine economy where various things can have checks and balances and it's a checksum, that type of thing, no problem. Anytime you touch humanity, the game theoretic aspect means that there's going to be bad actors, there's going to be whatever, frauds, scams, all that sort of stuff. And we're seeing that right now in the last 3 weeks, where there are rug pulls, there's scams, there's impersonation, IP violations. All this stuff is happening right now on the ocean market. And so we designed privacy first, and I really appreciate what Dean said in that, you know, the core infrastructure is privacy first, and I totally agree with that. But we have immense pressure right now to put an identity to every ETH address that is acting on the ocean marketplace, completely contravening our core values. But at the same time, this is what the users are asking for. So how does that work, right? We designed for privacy, and the users are saying, no, if we're going to trust this, because there's game theoretic aspect, we need to know the identity. We need to tie it to Twitter. We need to tie it to LinkedIn and GitHub and a whole bunch of other things. And not only that, we're also even going to do investigations of these people, because even then we don't know if we can trust them.
Interesting. So yes, and I'm curious there whether that means you need to disclose the identity of the world or just to the people participating in a particular data pool. You know, as I said, privacy is something where you want to be able to have value, you know, reveal things judiciously, or ideally get to the point where you're able to provide zero knowledge proofs that provide the credibility without necessarily disclosing the information. Now you may have the worst case problem, but there are a lot of scenarios where the zero knowledge proof kind of solution actually is adequate. If I'm a trucker and I'm dropping off liquid natural gas, my responsibility is to hand it to the guy I'm supposed to hand it to and make sure that he or she is trained on handling liquid natural gas. And other than that, I don't care, right? I don't know where it's going. It's not, you know, I mean, it's on the bill of lading. I could potentially get at that, but I can verify the credential without knowing who trained them, when did they last certify, where did they write out of, where do they live, where are they delivering it, all those kinds of things. And so these, you know, something that gives rich selective disclosure is where I would like to see credential systems and authentication systems and systems that drive this stuff go. While I'm confident you have use cases for which that would be adequate, I can easily imagine that the things people start with, that's just really hard. So I appreciate that. Now I realize I was responding to him and not your question. I apologize, Tor. Remind me of the question.
That's all right. The question was more around the relationship to scalability. If you want to give us a couple sentences
Sure.
on that.
So one of the things I'm thrilled with is the extent to which scaling on Ethereum looks like take it off chain with zero knowledge stuff. And the zero knowledge stuff, especially, you know, 2019 was the year of zero knowledge. We're just advanced forward leaps and bounds. You know, even if running a zero knowledge computation is slower by lots than running it on an individual machine, for a blockchain, I've got to run it on 100 or 50 or 100 or 1,000 machines. So running it slower on an individual machine and then rolling the proof up to something, you know, that's a win for various performance and scaling scenarios. So I don't believe there is a fundamental tension between scaling and zero knowledge. I think that's not right. So you know, I want us to have both, and I think that we've already shown a big advances in research that say we're going to be able to have both, and we're going to find different ways of having both. When they were first looking at I think there was I can't remember the name now, I apologize, simulating a small C memory runtime in zero knowledge, that was a big circuit. It was going to run very slowly, but one of the observations is, right, the more compartmentalized the computational model is, whereas C has this big flat memory and any instruction could change anything. But if you had a higher level of instruction set, now you could be more efficient about that process. And so I think we will get to the point where we can do easily off-chain zero-knowledge computation, which rolls up a proof of the computation, and then have a good computational model that I'm able to compute off-chain and combine together asynchronously into full proofs on-chain of correct execution. So I think the project, by the way, that I was thinking of was TinyRAM, which was one of the early, you know, Aaron and company that came up with that. And you know, the progress is obviously advanced substantially since then, and so I think there's a lot of additional opportunities for that.
So I agree with Dean that this problem is largely solved, at least in the relationship to blockchains and the blockchain-enabled operations, such as financial transactions. We will have full means for maintaining privacy already next year. We'll roll out ZK Sync with smart contracts, where you can write smart contracts in Solidity and just deploy them in ZK Sync and have native gadgets or native primitives to verify other proofs. You don't have to publish these proofs on chain, and the computation is done entirely off chain and verified off chain and like together in a single proof of the rollout. It's going to be cheap. That's not going to be that's a solved problem indeed. So we're also working with a similar thing, like with the architecture similar to TinyRAM. I know that Starkware has built their Cairo framework based on the same ideas. So we will have Turing-complete things that can verify any proofs. That's not a problem. I agree with Bruce. The biggest problem is the relationship between the users and like user demands and the UX trade-offs they have to make. So even though we don't have to go and make sacrifices in scalability or the cost, usability will change. Like if you have like fully private stuff, then you need to structure applications very differently. Like you need to keep your keys somehow. You need to for communication, for participation with public protocols, even for this addresses, where like it's very convenient to have your name being used as ENS domain and just sending this to friends. But that means that everybody will see like all your transactions. So I believe that the users, specifically on blockchain being a financial platform, will be privacy aware. So it's one thing when people kind of like some people at Google and NSA will be able to get your browser history, where people think, it's probably they're not going to reveal it to the world. It's very different than if all of your bank statements are published to the entire world, all your neighbors, friends, spouses, and so on. Once people understand that, there will obviously be demand for private transactions, for private payments, and for private access to DeFi protocols, and then things will start to rotate around that. Prerequisites being that the scalability is solved.
Great answers, guys. I think we're all in agreement that they're related issues. Maybe they're somewhat solved issues. Dean, I would characterize some of what you're talking about, what we've termed with Secret Network, this concept of programmable privacy, this idea of arbitrarily complex data privacy controls that are inherent to applications that do control how the data is used by whom in what context, whether that relates to like access control use cases or key management or whatever else. Like it does seem like we're starting as developers to focus on the right things. And then the challenge, as Alex and Bruce are both saying, is how is this going to impact the user experience? How do we make it so now this is still accessible to the end user and also to developers, so that it's not like overly complex asking people. We don't want to ever ask people to like kind of like roll their own crypto or something like that. So let's always keep in mind that we have these multiple audiences here. The people who are going to be building the applications need to find it straightforward to use. Then we need to be able to trust those applications that are built. Then we need to be able to craft a user experience that's going to scale as much as the underlying technology. I think we'll leave the tech aside for a second while we move into a question that's maybe a little bit more philosophical, but it's something I published an op-ed about actually almost about a year ago exactly, which is the state of surveillance capitalism. And the way that this all ties with Web3 is, like, nominally at least, Web3 was proposed, this evolving decentralization of the web. This is proposed as a way to counterbalance the monopoly model that's dominating the Web2 landscape today, where everything is a Google product or an Amazon product or a Facebook product. And obviously the ways in which that data is misused and leaked and all sorts of other things is highly bad. I don't really have a good way to say that except to say highly bad. And in theory, Web3 can solve this. But I think that it's, the privacy technologies within Web3 that might be able to solve this best. So my question is, how can Web3 combat surveillance capitalism? And right now, is it doing more to combat it, or is it doing more to establish new models, like these same decentralized technologies, whether we're talking about central bank digital currencies or any other implementation? Are these same technologies currently being used to instead enable more aspects of surveillance capitalism? Could we instead accidentally be perfecting the model of surveillance capitalism utilizing decentralized technologies? I don't want to call out any countries in particular, but possibly China. So we'll go one by one again. Start with Dean, and then Alex, and then Bruce.
Right. So this has been a problem. I mean, we first started thinking about this back in early cypherpunk days, and it's a really tough problem. One of the things when Bitcoin first came out, I was appalled, right? Because it was hailed as this, crypto solution to currency, and I'm looking at it and going, okay, there's all transactions are traceable. There's very little actual anonymity. It just had none of the things that I thought of as being crucial to, crypto enhancing my privacy and safety. And so it is a problem. It's a serious. It's one that I think we have to keep pushing against in a variety of ways. I did want to say something about your earlier comment that's related to this, where part of the reason I'm so excited about the zero knowledge tech coming out for scalability is privacy and security often are a thankless task. And so by having the value of the underpinning technologies provide direct value that people think they want, like scalability or performance, now you raise the level of the technology so that the lift to get actual private solutions is much smaller. So that, secret networks or Ocean or whatever can focus on the UX element of making it something that people have in their space and can manage to be a smaller lift, both for the users and also for the technology platform. And I think that is it's not visible how much that's advancing our ability to do future privacy forward, but it's the kind of thing that could crystallize, right? All it takes is, all it takes is a decentralized Tinder app that's actually protecting what you're willing to disclose to people, and now suddenly 1 billion people will get something that gives them control over privacy, and that'll be something where you go, oh yeah, I guess there are things I don't want to share except with a select few people when I swipe one direction or another, right? And so so it's one of those things where making that lift lower gives us a chance to crystallize some better solutions. One of the other things that I see happen, part of the problem with, for example, the Facebook stuff, there's certainly a big problem that they have all that data. There's an additional problem that they're the only one with it, right? And that you don't have control of it. You don't know what they have. And you don't have control. You don't have visibility into it and all that sort of thing. It's not great for everyone to have access to the same pool of data that they shouldn't have, but it's better than only one or two parties typically. Right? And so one of the things about the transparency and integrity of the blockchain is, that stuff is now there. Everything that you chose to do that way, not a lot of people have particular comparative advantage. And that will help us build protective measures as well as being a vulnerability.
These are great points, and it's indeed a very hard question. I'm puzzling over as well. I think that we have two sides here. One side is the user demand, which must be there. If users are willingly ignoring privacy, there's little you can do to help them. You cannot save them if they're not asking for help. On the other hand, there are a lot of users who are concerned, and the number is growing, and we see it manifesting in people using more privacy-aware or privacy-preserving products, such as users migrating to Brave browser, for example, from Google Chrome. So we just need to have this alternative for people that are just as good or maybe even better than the products which have these privacy abusive features. So Brave is a fantastic example because they actually turned the privacy-preserving technology of ad blocker into a feature because the web pages load faster by a significant degree, and people just enjoy a better browsing experience because they see less ads and have less of the tracking. So this is something I think we need a movement like cyberpunks, and it has to go on. Some things change in the society because there is a small minority of people who are really passionate about them, and they just go and promote these ideas, such as equal rights for all people and so on. At some point, or abolition of slavery, at some point this were in some places not ideas which the majority supported, but then some people really actively promoted it and convinced everybody else. And I think we need this kind of people, like heroes like Edward Snowden, who actually do this and then use technology to build these better products.
If we go back to surveillance capitalism, I think the internet is a good kind of case study where you have exponentially stronger asymmetric power from an individual, the voice of someone like Naval Ravikant or Tim Ferriss or any of these folks who really have, perfected this aspect. But then you also have the strengthening of large entities, governments, banks, etc., who can control the flow of information and value. And I think that the core of blockchain, what's the key value? And I think Dean also talked about this, and I'll add to that, is that it is a transport mechanism for information and value. They're one and the same thing fundamentally. And the core is that an individual now has that within their custody, rather than 1 or 100 different centralized services and platforms. And for that, you still will have these powerful AI-driven companies that are going to be able to go into your data set if you allow them, suck it out, and then create a model across multiple people and still advertise to you, still try to sell you stuff, still try to manipulate you and influence you. But at the same time, that data set, as Dean said, it's now available to multiple entities. So that data set can actually get better in a sense, but it can also be shared. So it's not just one entity or super company that you're sharing with. You're now sharing it with Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Microsoft, as well as the government. Good or bad, I don't know, but it gives a better chance for more people to get insights over their data, get paid for it potentially, but also for challengers to come up and erode away the strength of these incumbents. So we're going to have a little bit of both, same as the internet. The individual is going to be more powerful and weaker at the same time.
Always a good panel answer. It's both. but I have to agree. And it remains to be seen. Obviously, I'm a big Brave fan. They gave me a really nice hat at Heath Waterloo, and I wear it all the time now that it's getting to be the cold Chicago winter. I've got one more question before we move into like final shills, because I want to give everybody 60 seconds at the end to talk a little bit about like what is launching next for them, and so that people can continue like follow on Twitter, continue the conversation, because we're only scratching the surface, obviously. So our last question before we get to that closing is just around this idea, going back to the idea of privacy by default. Let's talk about the idea that a lot of people have misconceptions about privacy, that if we're talking about privacy being a public good or being a right, that we're talking about complete anonymity. And it's a misconception that I'm dealing with a lot in my own work in terms of educating people. No, it's not about absolute anonymity, it's about choice. But like, let's think about it just for a second out loud. To what extent is anonymity specifically the goal of privacy solutions? And maybe more to the point, what are the biggest drawbacks if there is now complete anonymity or a further lack maybe of accountability as a result of complete anonymity? So to what extent should it be our goal? What should we be worried about if we do actually achieve it? And we'll just go again, Alex, Bruce, and then Dean.
So I think that full anonymity is a good thing, and I think that the adversaries we deal with that are extremely powerful, we need a counterbalance. So if you think of some like big totalitarian countries, which we're not going to name, like what can a single individual do against this huge machinery? So I was born in the Soviet Union, and I have stories like my grandparents were repressed and brought to Siberia for like the rest of their life. And like, you need to give more power to people than to authorities, because even if the authorities are good now, it's not a guarantee that they will be good tomorrow. So you always want to keep this balance of power. We see it in the US, we see it like everywhere in all the corrupt regimes. So anonymity is like cryptography, which protects your identity completely and gives you a voice where you can go and just like express an opinion. And like, and this opinion must remain completely anonymous, is important. You cannot rely solely on your rights and on the constitution, because that might be ignored by people who have power. So you really want that power. So I think that is important just from this perspective alone.
I'm not going to waffle, because it's not about waffling, but perfect anonymity combined with human nature, which, let's be honest, there's a lot of badness that goes on to the world, in the world, if people can cloak behind anonymity, is not necessarily a great thing, because what we're seeing in the ocean market right now is anonymous users are screwing other users to try to get money because they're anonymous. And I think what the experience Alex had with his personal experience with his family makes total sense. The moment you asked the question, Tor, I thought, what about if we had a world where everything was totally transparent, where there was zero privacy to be expected? What kind of world is that? I crap, people know who I've had sex with, people know what I've done. You just know everything about somebody. And, in the early days of Facebook, people were essentially posting all of this stuff that you didn't really want to know. And you realize, oh, that wasn't such a good idea. It's a different world there that it's actually not that interesting. It's mundane. And then at certain points, you can pick up the stuff that you want, which you want to use against that person, which is also human nature once again. And I think that the important thing, and I think Balaji Srinivasan had talked a lot about this, is that you have enough places, dark spots, where you can congregate and have a different avatar, a different personality in the right moment. Because as humans, there is no way that we can break the bonds that we have with the others. We are defined as humans by the people that we associate with, our network, by the people that we work with and rise with, that type of thing. And so perfect anonymity is not necessarily something, and privacy is not something that I would ever want to go with, nor is perfect transparency. But what you want to do is give people the choice in certain situations to have that. And I think that's a fundamental right.
You're muted, Dean.
There we go. Pseudonyms can have accountable reputations, right? And that can solve a lot of those things. So this question, again, back to, Reason Magazine had a recent documentary on the early days of cypherpunks, where that was sort of one of the big things is anonymity the goal, or is it a side effect that you need to protect against the downsides of, right? What I don't want to do is trade pursuing perfect anonymity for strong privacy broadly across my life, right? I want both. I'm perfectly happy if getting real strong anonymity is hard and challenging. And frankly, endpoint security is so poor that you can think you got there, but yeah, it's really hard to get, as good as you might like. But the key thing to me is getting broad privacy for people and for businesses, and broad transparency for public and governance institutions. Right. I mean, I'm a lot less worried about my privacy if it's real clear what the people with guns are about to try and do. Right. If it's real clear where they're misspending money, so they shouldn't be taking as much of my taxes. Right. Those kinds of things, transparency on that side and then increased privacy on my side. Those are all, to my mind, good trends that we should get more of in both directions. I think that having strong privacy easily available for some things is crucial. Mostly people should use them or would use them for places where, they're doing something that they don't want tracked. And if instead they wanted to be able to opt into tracking to get better stuff or better support, but they can do so in a scope that doesn't disclose their identity out to this other, persona that they have in gaming or persona they have at work, that to me is sort of a goal, a thing for us to aspire to from an environment and from a technology point of view. So, I don't want to trade narrow protection for broad good, but I want some of each.
Wow. Guys, I think that the only thing we can do from here is start a morning show and do this on a regular basis, because this has been a lot of fun, very high energy, very strong perspectives. And again, all of you are building something in this space. So we'll just go one by one here to close this out. We've got about 60 to 120 seconds. So we'll do 15 seconds each. Just talk a little bit about what you got coming up right now that people can go check out. We'll go Bruce, Dean, Alex. I'll close it off. I'll say goodbye. We'll move to the next panel. Thanks to everybody who stuck around through this whole thing. You've been wonderful, but you should definitely listen right now, because everything that we're talking about is being implemented in practice by everybody that you've just seen?
For me, just go to oceanprotocol.com, learn about it. If you really want to play, market.oceanprotocol.com. If I'm going to use my last 20 seconds, what I'm going to say is this is one of the best panels I've been on. I really learned a lot from the other panelists. This is great. Very engaging. It's actually, I benefit probably more than the audience, unfortunately, but I really appreciate you guys. Oh, and this is the world debut of my mother-in-law's painting. I call it Shattered iPhone Glass.
Or oops, it slipped, right? So yes, I was just starting a chat in the backstage to make sure we can stay connected afterwards. This is great. So Agoric is, we have a platform for smart contracts where it will be the platform for rapid innovation because it provides the kind of composability you get and that led to rapid growth of systems like React and Vue, where you don't have to build everything from scratch. You can reuse components from other people, not by copying the source code and mucking with it and breaking the security assumptions, but by just grabbing it and parameterizing it and plugging it into your application. And so on our platform, now you can build real composable, extensible DeFi dApps in JavaScript. And so it becomes accessible to literally millions of more programmers as a platform for doing rapid innovation, built on underlying Tendermint core, and will be rolling out in 2021. So we just crossed alpha, where it provides the programming model that people can start to build their economic pieces in. We're building towards beta and really looking forward to what people are building. We have a hackathon going right now with Chainlink, where we've got Chainlink integrated in, so you can tie your easy to build JavaScript smart contract out to real world data. So we're very excited about where it's going and looking forward to what we're able to do soon.
So I'm going to be real quick because we get running out of time. Please check out ZK Sync, which is a ZK rollup on Ethereum, which is the only layer 2 solution which preserves exactly the same security properties as layer 1. It's coming live. You will be able to run your Solidity contracts. zksync.io. Thank you. And thank you, guys.
Awesome, man. And for anybody who wants to hear more of me, I don't know why you would, but I have my own podcast where we talk a lot about these issues of privacy. It's called Sharing Secrets. You can find it on SoundCloud, Spotify, and elsewhere. But most of the time when I'm not podcasting, I'm working on Secret Network. We're also a Tendermint chain. We've got layer 1 privacy-preserving smart contracts that utilize encrypted inputs, outputs, and state. It's been live on mainnet for the last 2 months. We've got some awesome collaborations coming up. We just launched privacy-preserving secret tokens, which are tokens issued on our platform that you can send privately to others via Kepler web wallet or via the command line, with more integrations coming soon. We care a lot about integrating these sorts of privacy-preserving solutions in DeFi. So I'm very excited for the next panel that's coming up, DeFi Insecurities, which I think is a very apt name for any panel about DeFi. I personally have a lot of insecurities about DeFi. So thank you very much for attending this panel. I can't wait for it to be posted. Thanks to all the other panelists. I hope we continue the conversation soon. Thanks, and enjoy the rest of the conference.